Welcome back to the 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show. My name is Wayne Kimmel, managing partner of 76 Capital, the sports tech venture capital company. And on this show, I interview top sports entrepreneurs, athletes, and executives who are shaping and many times changing the overall sports business industry. You can subscribe to our show on YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and on our 76 Capital website. Today, my guest is on our show today is sports scientist Dr. Erik Korem. Erik is an innovative leader in the human performance side of the sports world who's implemented the NFL's first sports science programs. He helped fuel feats of NFL as well as NCAA athletes. He's coached Olympic gold medalists and worked with so many others who have achieved the highest level of performance. As one of the top health and human performance authorities within the pickleball community, he has also done some amazing things by sort of taking the level of the pro level of coaching of pickleball and giving that to literally everybody. And everyone can have that at their fingertips with his company called AIM7. It's the first pickleball health and performance app designed to keep players healthy on the court. And it's the science that enables elite performers to allow anyone with a desire to improve their pickleball performance to do that. It's amazing, and I cannot wait to get into this with Erik. So Erik, welcome to our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Wayne, thank you for having me. It's a blessing to be here.
I'm really excited to have you on the show and talk about all the amazing things that you've done in your career, from being a sports science expert, working with NFL players, now involved in the world of pickleball, which is one of the fastest growing sports probably ever. But one of the things I wanted to jump into, I noticed on your website that you believe that we've all been thinking about stress the wrong way.
Oh,
and what do you mean by that? I had to ask you this.
Yeah. So stress isn't the enemy. It's really the gateway to growth. If you think about it from a biological perspective, if you want to get better at anything, a really easy example is like, let's say I want to get stronger, right? You go to the gym, you lift a weight, you lift something that's a little bit challenging. Your body does what? It wants to adapt, right? And so our bodies are adaptation machines. Now, our nervous system is wired to do that. That's how, as little kids, we start figuring out how to walk, crawl, run, all that kind of stuff, right? So the only way that you get better at anything is by deliberately engaging in stress. If you want to learn a new skill, you have to sit down and deliberately engage in the difficult task of learning. And it's stressful, but that stress creates neurological changes in your brain. When I started this entrepreneurial journey, I had no idea, I hate to say it, what I was doing when it came to like true like consumer product development. I've built products within organizations, but that's a very different task than building something for a consumer you've never met before. And so I had to learn a lot about product management, all the different things that go into that. And that was very stressful, but guess what it did? It created long-term memory and gave me a new framework. And so I think, the pandemic, everybody was trying to get rid of stress, right? There was just a lot of things that were weighing us down, and it kind of created this negativity bias towards stress. But and I know that the only way you get better is you sometimes have to go through the wall. And when we were training elite athletes, whether I was working with Olympic gold medalists or working in the NFL, it just takes what it takes sometimes. And so I think if we can start getting back to a healthy view of stress and learning how to adapt to it instead of just thinking about managing it all the time, we'll live more healthy and fulfilling lives.
Well, Erik, I'd love to get into a little bit about of your background.
Yeah.
And you said you were working, as an NFL sports scientist, one of the first, right? I mean,
Yeah.
in really bringing that to the NFL, what was that like?
Yeah. So it really started in college. Most of my career was in collegiate athletics. And in 2010, I was hired at Florida State University by a coach named Jimbo Fisher, and he had just taken over for legendary coach Bobby Bowden. Coach Bowden won several national championships. I was hired as the speed coordinator because of my work in Olympic track and field and my background as a football player and working in football. And after the first season, he asked me to be the director of football operations, which at the collegiate level is kind of like being a general manager in some senses. And I'm a team player, so I was like, I'll do whatever you want, but I would really like to be called director of sports science as well. That job didn't exist. And he's like, yeah, you call yourself whatever you want. I don't care. But I had the opportunity working with track and field athletes to travel the world and see what was happening over in Europe and Australia. And so during the off season, I had the opportunity to go to Australia, and I was embedded with an Australian rules football team for a month. And it was an information exchange, and I was helping them with a specific problem they had. And what I wanted to learn from them was, I want to learn about high performance, I want to learn about sports science, and I want to learn about athlete tracking.
I just happen to have one of these.
Oh my goodness. Yes.
Really?
Are you an AFL fan?
A friend of mine gave it to me who's from Australia. And so I always have it next to me. Anytime I got to give a shout out to Simon Morris right there. So there.
That's it right there. So it was the GWS Giants. They were a new expansion team. And just a quick aside note, the head coach was essentially, his name is Kevin Sheedy. He was like the Don Shula of AFL, and the first original high performance director was there. And so I was really blessed to go over there and kind of learn from the best. And their problem was they were getting like the equivalent of 30 first round draft picks, but these players wouldn't be any good for like 7-8 years. But they had just introduced free agency. And so what they wanted to do was like, how do we keep these players so when they're full grown men and they're ready to win, that they don't exit? So can you help us create like a collegiate environment? It was wild. Guess what? About 7 years later after inception, they won the premiership. So that was a pretty cool deal to watch. But I came back to the States and I convinced Coach Fisher to let me start using these tracking devices and embedding them in the pads of the players. And at the time, they just cut the space program. And so I hired a former NASA propulsion engineer to help me organize the data. Long story short, we were able to create the first data model for what was happening on a football field. So we could understand like a receiver may run 8,000 yards in a game, of which like 1,500 were high speed yards, versus a lineman may only sprint 80 yards in a game. It's like from the sideline to the field and back. And so that's just a small level of data, but we could start going, okay, what kind of training programs do these individual players need? And then how do we use this to create better practice structure? And we implemented this, kind of overhauled some things. And the next season, we had an 88% reduction in injury. Our team ended up winning a championship. And then the NFL flew in like 8 people. And they're like, what the heck is going on here? And it opened a multi-billion-dollar market for in-game tracking technologies. And so my career kind of took off. I was helping a lot of teams, including the New York Giants, kind of get set up with their tracking system. And it was kind of the wild, wild west. If I was smart, I would have gotten equity in some of these companies, and I'd be probably on your side of the table right now. But yeah, that was the early days of all that. And so I was kind of on the leading edge, bleeding edge, so you're making mistakes, you're learning out how to figure this out, you're implementing new technologies. And then we ended up creating kind of high performance infrastructures at the University of Kentucky. That was the next job I was at, where I oversaw kind of more the holistic development of the athlete. And then had some offers to go to the NFL, but I'm originally from Texas and was just waiting for the right opportunity. And when the Texans called, that was a great opportunity to kind of go home. So that's kind of the journey, but it was pretty wild.
I mean, were there certain people or teams that were hesitant to take the technology and sort of implement it into their daily routines?
100%. Even at Florida State, there was a ton of friction on the staff. I love football. I think it's a great game. The difference between, one of the things I've learned is like, coaches, CEOs, and military leaders all kind of like, they like to talk to each other, right? But there is a dramatic difference between being a new football coach and a CEO of a company. When you go into sports, you have a staff, you have a certain level of talent, you have a budget, you have overhead. When you start a company, you go from 0, you're trying to get 0 to 1 and then eventually 2, right? You're creating something out of nothing. And so you're literally if an investor puts money in your company, they're literally investing in the fact that you're going to create something that's new. Maybe you use principles of the past, but you're literally creating the future. Where in sports, it's like everybody's going, well, I was with so-and-so and we won a Super Bowl over here, so that's how we did it. So this is how it's going to be done. And that's just not how my mind works. I thought that was archaic way of thinking. And if you look at the best, Nick Saban and Bill Belichick, they were always iterating. Like, if my friend always says, if you copy the model, you copy the errors. So when Belichick and Saban's disciples would go off, they would go, well, this is what we did 7 years ago. And Nick's like 10 steps down the line. You see what I'm saying?
Yep.
They're too afraid to innovate. So there was a lot of friction. And then it was like, okay, we're just going to do what everybody else is doing so we can check the box. And then it became a frustration point for the players. It was just poorly handled. Now you're starting to see a little bit different tone, and you're starting to see the implementation being a lot better and the impact being there. So I was in the early days. It was always like I was swimming upstream.
So how did this experience within the NFL, using data, technology, analytics, all the things that you were doing on the sports science side, really shape your approach to bringing all of this to the world of pickleball?
Yeah. So the original concept for AIM7 wasn't for pickleball, and the big picture is not just pickleball. And I'll explain why we're in pickleball though. But I started pattern matching. So in sports, it started out with, let's just capture data. And then it went to athlete management systems. Let's aggregate the data and then display it. And then it went to, well, we got to derive meaning from it and drive actionable change. And so then it was deep learning and stuff like that. Ultimately, it always ended up on a head coach's desk, and they had to make a decision. And there are some head coaches that are unbelievable at using this stuff to really drive change. And then some coaches would just take that report and wipe their rear end with it. And so I was tired of that, right? I started looking, I was like, I've already experienced this. And then I looked at the consumer market, and we started seeing where the gaps and holes are and where the puck was going. And the puck still hasn't arrived yet, which is
amazing. So tell us a little more about, what does the product do, and how, and how is it able to really help these players? And I know you have a number of professional players that are endorsing the product and working with the product. And how do you get it all the way down to that, that weekend warrior that loves pickleball?
Yeah. So right now we're focused, if you look at the pickleball market, last year, roughly in the past 12 months, the data looks like around 45 to 50 million people have played the game. But some people, it's just like I play once a month, and some people I'm playing 3-4 times a week, right? So we're more on the early adopter segment of around 3 million, 4 million people that are playing it actively in tournaments and leagues. And the first thing we do is we provide two basic sets of recommendations. What do you do before you play and after you play? And then what do you do off the court? So it's on the court, off the court. So we have hyper-personalized warm-up video tutorials based off of your time demands, your fitness history, spatial constraints. Like I have a whole court 5x5 area. We provide breath work tools to help increase their focus. Then when they get off the court, here's your recovery recommendations and cool downs. We have nutrition and hydration recommendations. Like this is what you consume before, during, and after. And then we have a full suite of tools when you're off the court. So ultra personalized resistance training programs. That the really cool thing is our IP powers this, and we adjust your training sets, reps, and intensity based off of how you're adapting to stress, which we've been able to demonstrate that this leads to significant increases in your ability, to perform better. So like peak vertical power and strength, because we're giving you the precise dose of exercise that you're ready to adapt to. So that's IP that we created. We have full stack mobility training programs. So like, hey, I want to improve my hip, knee, and ankle mobility. We've got a full suite of tools there. And then mental performance tools. So I went out and basically put together a high performance team, the former senior psychologist from the US Olympics, head of wellness development for the Raptors, the former head of nutrition for the New York Giants. And so one of the things that we found in pickleball, another huge gap, is these players don't have formal mental performance training, so they don't know how to regulate themselves on the court. They don't know how to, push through stress. So we have education and tools that they can use. So it's a full stack human performance system. And it's targeted right now for the players that are playing several times a week in leagues and tournaments. However, I will let you know that we are about to make we're about to make the app freemium. And we're going to be releasing some features that I think people are going to be very excited about, giving them the ability to share their match data, kind of like Strava-ish features for pickleball. Players really want to share, how long they play, the calories they burn, all sorts of stuff. So we'll be releasing that here in the very near future.
That's really interesting. I mean, so you'll really be able to enable a user to be able to share their, all the, every, their scores, and just how much they're playing with their friends, so they can hopefully even, play more, right? I mean, and use your app more, and able to kind of get them to be getting better and train more.
Yeah. So, I mean, there's two sides of it. One is like the people that want to really improve, but to your point of how do we get that person that just plays twice a week for fun with his or her friends? These sharing features, we found people online literally taking pictures of themselves and their friends, manually taking pictures of their Apple Watches and Fitbits and showing this in Google and on like Facebook stories and Instagram. We're like, oh, we have that capability. So we're spinning this up so that it really starts, because there's a built-in network effect in pickleball. This is what's really unique, is that you don't just play one-on-one, you play with like 3 other people. And so the ability to virally get viral integration of more and more people into the app is right at our fingertips. So we've just been looking for ways. I mean, this is the Wild Wild West. We spend a lot of time on the court, a lot of time talking to customers, and we're just trying to improve their health and wellness, and then connect people and give them the opportunity to share their experiences online and with their friends. And so then you start to be able to, we're really building the health and performance brand for pickleball, and we're using the app as a way to get different market segments into our tech solution.
You've been there, really from the beginning of this sport. I mean, what has it been like, being on the ground, and seeing just how this sport has just rapidly grown over the last several years, and where do you think where it goes over the next 5 years or so?
Yeah, the best way to I think pattern match this is to look at CrossFit. Okay. When CrossFit came out, I don't know, 20 something years ago, well, CrossFit itself is a $1 billion entity. Okay. The difference between pickleball and CrossFit is pickleball is a more diverse sport, both by age, by all sorts. So it's from, 6 years old to 70 plus. And the fastest growing demographic is 25 to 34, which is pretty wild. So it's diverse in every sort of way that you can think of. And you can have people that are just coming out there, just getting off the couch, looking for a way to connect with their friends and finding fitness for the first time, to these people that are like extreme. I play 5 times a week. I'm playing in tournaments and leagues, spending $700 to go to the PPA or APP events. So then when you look at CrossFit, you look at what are all the products that came out of CrossFit: supplements, gear, technology. And so the way I look at this is like, everybody's been focused on balls, paddles, and courts. And there was a report that just came out today that we need about another $1 billion of investment to just meet the demands to build more courts right now. But
Right.
What always has the highest, makes the most money? It's technology, and it's been completely ignored. And so what we're doing is we're using, that's where we're focused. But there's other ways. We're building omni-channel assets. We have the #1 newsletter in the sport for health and performance with 23,000 subscribers. It's growing 20% month over month. We're building a merchandise arm because people are asking for these crazy t-shirts that we've been creating. And so you can start seeing you have all these different channels to market and acquire customers. Then you bring them in a data and a tech solution, and you have a digital way of communicating with somebody. And then you start thinking about all the different companies that would like to position their product from a health and performance perspective. And that's where we're finding our superpower is right now. So we've been starting to create marketing partnerships with some really cool folks because they're like, oh, you can bring our solution right to our target audience. And if you look who's really investing in this sport, it's AARP, Humana. So you can imagine QVC just purchased the streaming rights for USA Pickleball. So there's a lot of dollars that are being put in this sport. And we've started to realize that we can become the center for the health and performance aspect of the sport. We can help improve people's lives. And then we can also bring them products and services that we vet that from a scientific perspective, we know can help enrich their health and wellness journey. And so we see ourselves as people that can directly impact on-court performance. We hook them with what they love. And then we can also help them sleep better. We can help them with their stress. We can help them create community. Do you see where this goes?
Yeah, it's fascinating. The QVC news, that's unbelievable. And I got to ask you, so what are some of these T-shirts? Like you can tell me about.
Yeah. So when I first, almost a year ago, I went to the US Open in Naples, Florida. There were 50,000 people there. And that's when we released the beta version of the app. And I was having, when we first had the beta come out, I went to a facility in Katy, Texas, and I'm showing people the app. And the first thing we're trying to do is get people to warm up. Okay. And I sit everybody at this facility. It's a great facility. And they're like, you got to talk to Julio. Julio's the guy. So I go over and meet Julio. Julio's drinking a beer. He's actually a very skilled player. And I'm like, Julio, why won't you warm up? And he's like kind of pointing around. He's like, do you see anybody else warming up? And the funny thing is his buddy was behind him warming up. I didn't say anything. I said, so what are you, embarrassed? He's like, yeah. I was like, so just be weird. Warm up, man. And he just started dying laughing. And that's when it hit me. That's the shirt. Be weird, warm up. So I made a shirt and I wore it in Naples, Florida at the Open. If I had 500, I would have sold all of them. I'm going back next year and I'm going to bring as many as I can get there. The funny thing is, about 4 weeks later, Julio sends me a text message with a link to an Instagram post of him warming up at the US Open, then him winning a medal, and now he's sharing it with everybody. And so this be weird warm up thing, like I say this in the kindest way, but pickleball's almost got this like cult-like group. Like people are just, they love the community. They're very loyal to the brands. And so if you have something that they can resonate with, they're all over it. So we're building out a drop ship store right now for all these be weird warm up shirts and hoodies. And
Awesome.
It's fun.
That's amazing. That's amazing. So who are some of the athletes that you've trained? Are there certain individuals that you've trained and that have, any real success stories of some of these high profile, elite athletes that are using, your training methods to improve their game?
Is this specifically in pickleball, or you want to know the other stuff?
Whatever you got, I'd love maybe a little bit from the, from the football days, maybe even to now.
Yeah, probably the most successful athlete I ever coached. She won 8 Olympic medals, 3 Olympic golds. Her name is Veronica Campbell Brown. She's one of a few women to ever win the 200 meters back to back. And I worked with her for 14 years. I was on Tyson Gay's support team the year he broke the US 100 meter record. In football, gosh, at Florida State, our whole offense was drafted. Worked with, I coached Zadarius Smith and Bud Dupree in their combine prep. Man, I've worked with so many great athletes. The great thing about those athletes is like they're genetically gifted. They have wonderful work ethics, and your job is just to squeeze the little bit of left, in the sponge. In pickleball, I've gotten to work with Zane Navratil and Megan Fudge. Megan's arguably the number 1 player in the world. She just won nationals. Her and her husband were both great college tennis players. He ended up playing pro, and then he was an assistant coach at Florida State. That's the connection. Megan's they're both pro pickleball players, but she's unreal. We've had a lot of semi-pro players that have been using the app, which is really funny. It's like the problem with pickleball is I think everybody would say this is a sport. but people just aren't treating it like a sport. And so it reminds me, we're having to educate the market. It's like the early days of Headspace. When I was at University of Kentucky, we did one of the first studies with Headspace. This is 2012. And when you mention mindfulness meditation to coaches, they're like, what? Like, what are you, some like Eastern guru? You flying on a carpet? We're like, no. This is like a legit performance training tool. But they had millions in venture capital and they had time to educate the market. And so for us, there's an education process. And so like we've got to serve players on multiple levels and kind of move them through a funnel of education. It's like, so if you look at our social media, a lot of it's funny stuff. Like we've had, I think in the past 90 days, we've reached 6.2 million people. We do a lot of meme marketing, and then we dose it in with education. And you'd be shocked at the celebrities that are like, hey, this stuff's great. You know, it's like, that's kind of the modern marketing strategies. You got to entertain and then educate. And then we can kind of bring them in. And then we're like, okay, like from a coaching perspective, I can't work one-on-one with these people. So the app is created in such a way that we can find that one area that you gravitate to the fastest. Some people it's sleep. I've had some people where I had a guy write in. He's like, Erik, I always thought mental performance stuff was woohoo. He's like, and then I started using your daily gratitude journal and it's changed my life. That's the kind of stuff where you're like, this is awesome. So, you know, working with the big time athletes is great, but it's those type of emails that you're like, we're really making an impact in people's lives.
Yeah, it's really incredible. As we start to wind down here this episode of our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show, it's been amazing having, Dr. Erik Korem on our show, talk about all the things that he's doing. And, Erik, one of the things I just had to mention, I noticed that, you have your own podcast as well. You do this show, and you've had actually one of our 76 Capital CEOs on your show, Stephen Webster from Sensei.
So smart.
He's super smart.
Yeah.
It was great seeing that. But tell a little bit about, what it's been like, hosting your show, what you've learned, and how that's helping you really move your business forward.
Yeah. So about 4.5 years ago, I read this book by Russell Brunson. And he was, it's a marketing book. And he's like, the first thing you want to do before you even have a product is you want to build an audience. And I was like, this is so backwards, but it makes a lot of sense. And so I'm like, okay, my expertise is in high performance. Let's make a high performance show. And right around that time, a little after that, the Huberman Lab came out. And so what I saw was, Huberman's podcast is like 2.5, 3 hours long. And I was like, I think there's some really good stuff on there. But I was like, if we made ours short and gave people actionable tips for their, their mind, body recovery, for, as we like to say, we distill cutting edge science, leadership, and life skills into simple tactics that I could meet the busy people that I want to help improve their lives. And so going through the process of learning how to create content that people would love and share, and then learning like what subjects really, excited them and then helped them in their, everyday lives. That was really beneficial for me as we started creating content for AIM7. And so that's been a wild journey. We're like 560 episodes deep now. I've had the opportunity of meeting some like Stephen Webster. We've had some just world class. I got to interview like Annie Duke. I've interviewed elite athletes, coaches. Chris Peterson came on our show and talked about why he retired at the peak of his career. I've had the opportunity to interview some of the best in their fields. And that has only made me a better person and a better leader. And so it's very humbling to do a show where you're talking to people that are so accomplished or have done excellent things. And you can't help but like not walk away and be like, man, I have so much further to go. But it's an enriching experience.
Well, it's been awesome having you on our show. Again, Dr. Erik Korem, you got to check out AIM7. Check out all the things that he has out there today. If you're a pickleball player, this is your guy. He's got what you need. And it's not only just pickleball, as you said, right? I mean, it's all about just being, being able to perform at your highest levels. And again, thank you so much for taking the time and for joining us on our 76 Capital Sports Leadership Show.
Thank you for having me on.